They revved up the public opinion like I was some monster.
Christina Boyer is serving life in prison plus 20 years for the 1992 murder of her 3-year-old daughter, Amber. It's a crime she says she did not commit, that she wasn't even there when it happened.
Did you kill your daughter?
No, ma'am, I did not. I did not kill my daughter.
There are some cases that transcend state lines and capture the public's attention, whether they happened in Georgia or not. Maybe it's the mysterious circumstances surrounding a death, like in the case of Kendrick Johnson. Or perhaps it's a case where all the evidence is there, yet the person who is supposedly found responsible is actually found not guilty, like with Casey Anthony. Or it's something universally unforgivable, like the case of Chris Watts, whose crime shocked the world. But today's case, it's one of the strangest and most unique I've ever come across. So much so, I had never actually heard of it before. I was just watching Hulu one night, drifting off to sleep, when a random documentary began playing. And as I watched, I was immediately hooked. And then I found out this case actually took place right here in Georgia. I had never heard this story before, but the documentary took me on such an emotional roller coaster that I knew I had to share it with you. When it was over, I was left feeling deeply unsettled. I still don't know if this person committed the crime or not. I don't know what to believe. There's evidence on both sides. She could have done it, or she might not have. Her upbringing was so traumatic, it's hard to know if she was a victim of her circumstances or if she was a master manipulator who eventually became a killer. Her childhood involved physical and sexual abuse, drug addiction, adoption, and even a poltergeist. Yes, you heard that right, an alleged poltergeist. But the truth is, many people have traumatic upbringings and they don't become killers. A case so strange that she was even spotlighted on an episode of the popular show Unsolved Mysteries, quickly becoming a local celebrity in her town, or also the town freak. As you'll hear, her case was never tried to the extent it should have been. She was charged with murder and ultimately sentenced to death, even though she was not home at the time of her own daughter's death. So how can someone be convicted of murder if they weren't even home when the crime supposedly occurred? The prosecution insisted there was enough evidence to prove her guilt without a doubt. But decades later, more and more people are calling for her exoneration, arguing that she should never have faced the death penalty in the first place. And now, thanks to a Hulu documentary that came out in 2023, Christina Boyer's case is gaining even more attention. We may never know exactly what happened to Christina Boyer's daughter, the one she was convicted of brutally murdering. But across the country and around the world, people are rallying to shed light on her case and possibly help exonerate her. This is the story of Christina Boyer, convicted of brutally beating her daughter to death, but not even home when her daughter supposedly died. Buckle in, because this story is a doozy. This is one case you'll be thinking about long after the video ends, because one thing is certain, when your fate is sealed, there's no turning back. The gavel has fallen. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. Christina Boyer was born on October 23, 1969 in Columbus, Ohio. Her biological mother struggled with drug addiction and couldn't care for a newborn, especially with other kids already at home, so she ended up placing Christina up for adoption. But luckily for Christina, she wouldn't be in foster care for long. By the age of 2.5, she was adopted by a well-known foster couple in Franklin County, Joan and Josh Reish. At times, the Reishes had as many as 6 foster kids living in their home at one time. Over the years, they had taken in hundreds of children throughout Columbus, but what was supposed to be a temporary home became permanent. They officially adopted Christina. Being in foster care is hard for any kid, but being adopted young, Christina saw the Reishes as her real family. As her parents, you would hope that after a rough start, things would finally start getting better for the young girl. But unfortunately, that hope didn't last long. Even though this was her new home, Christina's life there was far from peaceful. The house was chaotic, and Joan and John, who were deeply religious, were also extremely strict. Just as she was hitting her teen years, Christina, who went by Tina back then, said that her adopted brother started molesting her. Not just once, but multiple times. But when she told her adopted parents this, they didn't believe her. They were furious that she would even say something like that, make these accusations, and appalled that she would even make up these supposed accusations. Instead of protecting her, they beat her, saying that she was just making it all up for attention. But many years later, the person who allegedly molested Christina actually was arrested on sex crimes. And while the abuse continued, something even stranger started happening. By the time she was 14, Christina began noticing weird things around the house. Her alarm clock would glitch out, objects would just start moving on their own, or just show up in random places. The TV in the living room would randomly turn off and on, even when it was unplugged. Lights would flicker, silverware would randomly be bent unnaturally. Sometimes things would fly across the room. It felt like something straight out of a horror movie, literally, like the hit film Poltergeist, which had just come out in 1982, 2 years prior. And strangely enough, all these creepy things started happening not long after Christina had seen the film. Coincidence or something more?
Things started happening in my home. I went downstairs to watch cartoons, and the TV volume kept blaring or changed the channel. And from there, it went crazy.
At first, the Riches thought that Christina was just acting out, being a teenager, maybe just trying to get attention. But then they started seeing the strange things themselves, and that's when they got scared. They became convinced that their house was haunted by a demonic spirit. Worse, they believed that Christina had become possessed. They called a priest to perform an exorcism on the entire house, as well as Christina. And they also started to believe that Christina was the one making things move, using her mind. Plates, curtains, chairs, you name it. And it all seemed to happen when she was either upset or anxious. The priest and her adopted parents prayed over her, but ultimately the exorcism didn't work. Objects were still flying around the house, things were still moving on their own, and the family had no explanation other than Christina was possessed. That's when the Riches decided to call the local media, hoping that someone could capture the unexplainable on camera, that others would actually believe them. And they did. Overnight, Christina became a local celebrity, or to some, the local witch. Her popularity skyrocketed in December 1984 when a journalist from the Columbus Dispatch snapped a now famous photo. Christina sitting calmly in an armchair right in her living room, while a telephone cord suddenly flew across her lap. The reporter claimed that the phone receiver had lifted off the side table and hurled itself across the room, just so happening to land right in Christina's lap. And this happened after hours of nothing. No movement, no activity, just silence. But once it happened, word spread like wildfire. Soon, Christina had a new name, the Columbus Poltergeist Kid. I do want to make note that in the documentary, Christina mentions that her birth family are in fact Wiccans and that telekinetic abilities allegedly run in her biological family, claiming that her great-grandmother and biological mother both had the ability to move things with their mind. But she claims that at the time that she was a teen, this was all unknown to her. Christina quickly became a target at school. Kids would hum the Twilight Zone theme song as she walked by. Some were too scared to even pass her in the hallway, afraid that she was dangerous or that she may attack them with her mind. She went from being a regular teenager to the town pariah. But it didn't stop in Columbus, Ohio. Word traveled fast, and by the mid-'80s, Christina, still just a teenager, had become a national sensation. Her family claimed she had the ability to move objects with her mind, and that only fueled the media fire. Her notoriety reached new heights when Christina and her family were featured on the hit TV show Unsolved Mysteries in 1993. The Riche house became a full-on circus with both local and national media crowding the property, hoping to witness something otherworldly. At one point, Christina said it just felt like everyone wanted to see what was going on in their home. Like their home and their livelihood was a live performance. Christina said later in life that it felt like Showtime at the Apollo. And it wasn't just the media or curious neighbors anymore. Paranormal investigators started showing up too. One of the parapsychologists drawn to this case was Dr. William Bill Roll, a scientist who specialized in studying paranormal phenomenon. He quickly became fascinated with Christina and her so-called abilities. Determined to get closer to the truth, Bill and his assistant actually moved into the Reish family home so they could observe Christina around the clock 24/7. Bill followed her throughout the house with a video camera, and he set up camcorders in different rooms to capture any unexplained activity. He told the media that he had witnessed what he called genuine, spontaneous psychokinesis. Yet, ironically, he also admitted he never actually saw an object move entirely on its own. But still, he documented everything. Christina's physical and emotional state before and after each incident. Years later, he would publish a book about his experience with Christina, Unleashed: Of Poltergeist and Murder, the curious story of Tina Reish. In it, he claimed that Christina's case was one of the most convincing examples of poltergeist activity that he had ever encountered. He described her abilities as destructive, driven by what he called thwarted emotions. But not everyone was convinced. Townspeople and even some fellow paranormal investigators believed that Christina was simply faking the entire thing. Skeptics, including the journalist who snapped the now iconic photo, began to notice a pattern. If everyone in the room focused on an object, hoping to see it move, then nothing happened. But the moment someone looked away, that's when the object would suddenly fall or fly across the room. The case became wildly polarizing. People were split. Some believed Christina and the Reish family were genuinely experiencing something supernatural or paranormal. Others were convinced it was just a grab for attention, a calculated shot at 15 minutes of fame. And that debate might have gone on forever until one day where everything changed. During a routine visit from a television crew, the team spent hours waiting for any sign of paranormal activity. And, like usual, nothing happened. Eventually, they stepped out of the room, leaving a video camera rolling. Whether Christina knew the camera was still recording is unclear, but odds are she didn't, because what it captured would unravel everything. The footage showed Christina deliberately knocking over a table lamp, then immediately screaming, pretending it was the work of the poltergeist.
All I wanted to do was have something to eat and go spend the night somewhere else, and I couldn't until something happened.
When the news crew confronted Christina and her adopted parents with the footage, she admitted to staging the event. She claimed she felt intense pressure from her adoptive parents to perform so the crew would have something dramatic to take back with them. But her adopted parents said this was the only time that they ever faked an encounter. But it was too late, the damage was done. And for many, this moment discredited the entire case. So skeptics were quick to pounce. And to this day, people continue to dissect old footage, slowing it down frame by frame, pointing out moments where they believe Christina was clearly manipulating the objects herself. They saw the whole ordeal as a hoax, a troubled teenage girl just craving attention. But still, Joan, Christina's adopted mother, never backed down. Even after the stage lamp incident, she insisted the rest of the occurrences were in fact real, that something unexplainable really had happened in their Columbus home. But by then, it was too late. Christina and her family's reputation had already been shredded. To most people, they were liars, frauds, a family chasing fame. But one man did still believe them, Dr. William Roll. Dr. Roll was convinced that Christina possessed real telekinetic abilities, so much so that he actually invited the then 15-year-old to live with him in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where he could study her more closely using a series of scientific and psychological tests. His goal was to uncover the source of Christina's powers and maybe even teach her how to control them. While staying with Dr. Roll, Christina underwent everything from brain scans and hypnosis to therapy sessions and even attended a parapsychology conference. She even began developing a close bond with one of her psychiatrists, Jeannie Legel, who became something of a mother figure to her. Jeannie claimed to have witnessed strange things firsthand, like a hairbrush flying out of a purse and across the room, or even a tape recorder launching itself off of a dresser. For the first time in a long time, Christina felt safe. She wasn't being bullied or feared. She wasn't the town freak. In Chapel Hill, she felt seen, understood, important, extraordinary. But that feeling wouldn't last long. Eventually, her adoptive parents asked her to return back home to Ohio. And with that, the researchers put their study on hold. But coming home wasn't the fresh start Christina had hoped for. She claims the abuse from her adopted family only intensified. When abuse is all you've ever known, breaking the cycle, as we know, is incredibly difficult. And at the age of 16, Christina ran away and married a man named James Bennett, hoping it would give her the freedom that she so desperately wanted. However, she says James was abusive. She claims he bound, gagged, and raped her, and on one occasion allegedly beat her until she was unconscious. So finally, Christina reached her breaking point. In a desperate attempt to escape, she jumped from a second-story window, but James eventually tracked her down and brought her back home. She ended up managing to escape again, and after several failed attempts, hiding for a time with a roommate. Even though she was still legally married to James, she had a brief fling with another man. But James continued to stalk her, and Christina grew fearful for her own safety. Her health began to deteriorate rapidly, and she then developed an eating disorder from struggling to eat and drink. And while she was hospitalized for her health issues, Christina discovered that she was pregnant. The news gave her a newfound sense of purpose, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a reason to live. She was determined to be a good mother and give her child the life and the upbringing that she never had. Christina gave birth to Amber Gail Bennett on September 29, 1988.
When I found out I was pregnant with Amber, I had an eating disorder. And really at that point, I wasn't being treated for mental health. I was horribly depressed. So finding out that I had a baby didn't depress me. It actually saved my life, because I would have killed myself probably at that point had it not been for my child. I wanted her more than anything in the world, and I didn't want to give her up because I didn't want her to grow up like I did, thinking that, well, you know, what's wrong with me, the reason my parents didn't love me. And so I figured with Amber, we may not have much, but at least she would know that I loved her and that she was mine and that I wanted her. Now, in hindsight, I feel like how incredibly selfish I was, that I should have given her up. And she would probably be alive today if I had, but I wanted her so bad. And I miss her so much.
But it wasn't a happily ever after story. According to Christina, her first husband, James Bennett, continued to stalk, threaten, and harass her. He even reported her to Franklin County Children's Services for child neglect. Eventually, Christina was able to divorce James, but she remarried again in 1990 to Larry Boyer, whose last name she took. And although Amber wasn't technically his, Larry promised Christina he would be a loving father to her and a loving husband to Christina. However, after a few months of marital bliss and adjusting to motherhood, Christina claims that Larry began to abuse her. While she says Larry never hit Amber, she feared that he eventually would. Not only was she terrified for her own safety, but she knew she had to protect her daughter now too. A social worker advised Christina that if she and Amber didn't leave, the state would have to take Amber away. Everything changed one night when Larry was arrested for hitting Christina. While he sat in jail, Christina listened to the social worker's advice. She packed her bags and fled with Amber. She remembered the kindness that the researchers had shown her, and she had stayed in touch with them. Not only did they offer to help her, but they also wanted to continue their studies with Christina. By this point, they had moved to Carroll County, Georgia. Christina decided it was time for her and Amber to start fresh. No one would be able to find them in a random small rural Georgia town, or so she thought. So that night, Christina and Amber caught a bus to Georgia to begin a brand new life. When they arrived in Carroll County, Georgia, they had only the clothes on their backs. Amber had just turned 3 years old. Christina was excited about the fresh start for her and her daughter. When I moved to Carrollton, I felt between a rock and a hard place because I didn't really have a safe place to go with Amber. Carrollton was a safe place. I really wanted to come down and get away from everything, and I really thought we could make a new start. Christina soon found an apartment and signed up for food stamps. She was proud of herself for making it all on her own. She even started taking parenting classes at the local tech college and began taking math classes as well. It appeared as if her life was starting to finally look up, finally going right for once. But Christina would struggle to find some steady work, eventually agreeing to help Jeannie transcribe some notes for a book that they had planned to write together. She was only making $5 an hour, but Christina held on to hope that once the book was published, it would bring newfound financial stability. You know, it's hard to find a job. I didn't want to be on welfare, but I didn't have a choice, Christina said. I couldn't get a job because I didn't have a babysitter, and I couldn't pay for a babysitter because I didn't have a job. And I didn't have a job because I didn't have a car, and I couldn't get anywhere to get a freaking job. Once you get caught in the cycle, you're just stuck. As the holidays approached in December 1991, Christina became increasingly anxious. She needed a more stable income to put food on the table and was starting to fear eviction. Wanting Amber to have at least one gift to open on Christmas morning, Christina ended up calling a local radio station and actually entered her daughter into the station's Christmas Wish program.
My name is Christina Boyer, and I just moved to Georgia from Ohio. Me and my 3-year-old daughter, we just left my very abusive husband. Since we moved here, I'm not going to be able to afford to get my daughter anything for Christmas. I was just wishing that my daughter might be able to get a Barbie doll. She's wanting a Barbie doll for Christmas real bad. Her name is Amber.
She described the challenges they were both facing and how hard she was trying to create a better life for them both. And after settling in Georgia, Christina said that's when Amber's personality truly began to shine. She described her daughter as a hyper-energetic child who just happened to be clumsy too, like most kids her age. Christina recalled how Amber would often fall off her tricycle, scrape her knees on the sidewalk, or oftentimes trip down the stairs. And not too long after their move, a new man entered their lives, a local from Carroll County named David Heron. The two began dating in 1992, and Christina quickly became infatuated, believing David actually might be the one. David also had a daughter around Amber's age as well, and the two children played together quite often. Trusting that David, as a father himself, knew how to care for children, Christina had no reservations about leaving Amber with him while she went to work. But April 14th, 1992 would change everything. It started out just like any ordinary day. Christina fed Amber and the mother started getting ready for work. Easter was just right around the corner, and Christina had picked up an extra shift or two to help pay for some baskets and some holiday treats. There were some times when Christina would take Amber to work with her, but as any parent knows, how much work can you truly get done while watching a toddler at the same time? So Christina knew she would get more work done if Amber stayed home. So as usual, she left Amber in David's care. By this time, the couple had only been dating a few months or so. Before rushing out the door around 12:30 p.m. that afternoon, Christina last saw Amber sitting in David's lap with a book in her hands. And that would be the last time Christina ever saw her daughter alive. It was only supposed to be 6 hours, nothing out of the ordinary. But something happened during that time, something no one has been able to fully explain to this day. Because when Christina returned home from work, Amber was dead. Unbeknownst to Christina, shortly after she left work to head home after her shift, David had called her office. He told Christina's coworker, Jeannie, that he couldn't wake Amber. She was unconscious. Jeannie tried to stay calm and told David that Christina was already on her way home. The office was only about a 20-minute drive away from David's house, so she told him that Christina should be home soon. And when Christina arrived home, Amber was already unresponsive. Panicked, the couple rushed her into David's car and sped toward the hospital. During the ride, Christina frantically tried to perform CPR on her daughter, desperately trying to wake her up. But Amber never would regain consciousness. She was pronounced dead shortly after their arrival to the hospital. Christina broke down immediately, sobbing, screaming, and demanding answers from David. "What happened?" she kept asking. But all David could say was, I'm sorry. But the hospital staff weren't convinced by their reactions. They were immediately suspicious. Medical personnel noted that Amber had extensive bruising on her face and body. So that's when the hospital staff contacted the police and Child Protective Services. Soon after, both David and Christina were arrested on suspicion of child abuse. When you looked at her with all the bruising, it was kind of obvious the child had been severely physically abused, said retired Carrollton police detective Mike Bradley. But Christina had a different story. According to her, Amber was simply a clumsy, active child. Christina claimed her daughter had jumped out of her car seat days earlier and hit her head on a curb, resulting in a large knot on her forehead. Her co-worker, Jeannie, even confirmed that Amber was a super active kid, constantly running, jumping, and of course, falling. Christina told investigators that she had been monitoring the bump and that Amber had seemed fine, playing in the yard shortly after the fall, as if nothing happened. She insisted that if Amber had shown any unusual behavior, she would have taken her to a doctor immediately. But to Christina, Amber had seemed perfectly normal until it was too late. During questioning, David also told officials that Amber had also fallen on the front porch steps and landed face first into the gravel the day right before her death.
In the days leading up to that, as I would come home, Amber would increasingly have more bruises. When I questioned Amber about it, she would tell me that she had fallen. David had told me that she had fallen, and I believed her because Amber was rambunctious and usually got bruises all the time.
Were these just innocent accidents? Was Amber truly just a clumsy child? Or was something far more sinister happening behind closed doors? And the medical examiner confirmed what doctors feared most. Amber's injuries were consistent with prolonged abuse. The examiner concluded that the injuries had occurred over several days, stating that multiple bruises were in various stages of healing, but some were also fresh. Others had clearly been there for days. This wasn't a one-time incident. It was a pattern.
Mannequin that was used to help indicate where Amber Bennett's injuries were. This is a classic representation for a case of fatal child abuse.
And the medical examiner suggested that Amber most likely died from a fatal blow to the head shortly before her death, a time when, according to her alibi and witness, Christina wasn't home. So that's when the blame game began. Christina and David quickly started pointing fingers at one another.
Who you think done that?
Well, I guess Christine. What I'm thinking. Because like I said, if it's me or her was the only ones with her.
If you didn't kill her, who did?
I have to assume that David did. She was alive when I left the house. She was dead when I returned home. He was the only one that was there.
On the day of Amber's death, the man who had been entrusted with her care claimed he had simply fallen asleep in the living room. According to David, while he was napping, Amber somehow managed to get out of the house and fall down the trailer's front porch steps. He admitted he hadn't locked the screen door, but said he didn't think it was that serious at the time. Christina, on the other hand, told authorities that that's when she pulled up to the trailer, David was already standing outside, telling her he couldn't wake Amber up from her nap. But even with their conflicting stories, what officials did know was this. Amber had died from blunt force trauma to the head. There was swelling on her brain, but when exactly that trauma occurred was still up for debate. At first, investigators considered whether the fatal injury might have happened before Christina left for work. Possibly some sort of delayed reaction from a head injury sustained days earlier when she fell and hit a curb. Could internal damage have gone unnoticed until it was too late? Or was David's panicked apology at the hospital an admission of guilt? Something wasn't adding up. Someone wasn't telling the whole truth.
I did not kill my daughter. I didn't beat her. I never beat her. Yes, I spanked her, but I never beat her. I never left marks on her. I had no reason to believe that that would be the last day that I would ever see her alive again.
Was it Christina? Was it David? Or was it both of them? Jack Bell, who was Carroll County Sheriff at the time, later said Amber's injuries were so severe, so extensive, that you couldn't tell it was the same child. And from the start, Christina and David received very different treatment from law enforcement. During their investigation, police reportedly told Christina she didn't need an attorney, even though she had asked for one. At first, officers even told her they believed David was responsible for her daughter Amber's death. But David was already spinning a completely different story, one that pointed the finger directly and solely at Christina. David maintained his innocence and claimed Amber began acting strangely nearly 2 hours after Christina had left for work. His legal team argued that Amber's injuries were a result of abuse by her own mother. Christina, on the other hand, admitted she wasn't a perfect mother, but insisted she had never hurt her daughter. Yes, Christina admitted to spanking Amber if she was in trouble or acting bad, but she wouldn't beat her. She believed she was being set up.
The hospital workers said they identified the bruises and the injuries on Amber's body as a severe case of child abuse. What do you make of that?
They're going to say a lot of things to make it look as sensational as they can. I'm not saying that Amber's body was not bad, it was. But I'm being held responsible for something that I didn't do.
Her first statement to police was never recorded, while David's interview was both taped and transcribed. And in that interview, detectives reportedly told David that they were on his side. David was well known in the small Georgia town. Christina, the newcomer from Ohio, had no such social standing. That night, police accompanied Christina to her apartment where she changed her clothes. She was then taken back to the station. Only then did officers read her Miranda rights and ask her to sign a couple of documents. When she asked if she needed a lawyer or if she was in trouble, police told her it was just part of the procedure. Meanwhile, investigators obtained a coerced confession from David in which he admitted to sexually abusing Amber, despite the fact that Amber's autopsy showed no signs of sexual abuse. David later walked back this confession, saying Amber was frequently bruised, but only ever spanked on the bottom for misbehavior. He also claimed that Christina spanked Amber more often than he did. David portrayed himself as the concerned parent, the one who urged taking Amber to the doctor, alleging Christina feared losing custody if child services ever got involved. When police searched both homes, they found a belt at Christina's apartment they believed had been used to hit Amber. They brought it to the medical examiner, who compared it to a bruise on Amber's face and even photographed it for evidence, but actually never tested the belt for fingerprints or DNA. Later, the medical examiner testified that such a flexible object could not have caused the fatal injury. Meanwhile, bloody tissues matching Amber's blood type were found in David's trailer. He said they were from cuts on Amber's lip, which the medical examiner confirmed as fresh. Investigators also dug into Christina's past in Ohio. They contacted acquaintances, her abusive ex-husband, and estranged family members, many of whom gave statements after Amber's death and had personal reasons to discredit Christina.
She had a short temper. She slapped her in the mouth one time.
Christina tore her little butt up.
In a letter from jail in 1993, she wrote this: "There are suddenly a lot of people I never met crawling out of the woodwork to say what a terrible mother I was." Officials also submitted an old hospital incident involving Amber as evidence of past abuse, even though Child Services never filed a formal report. That 1988 incident involved Christina taking Amber to the hospital for a severe diaper rash that escalated to a staph infection. Hospital staff initially feared a burn and notified Child Services, but doctors later determined it wasn't intentional and that Christina had shown appropriate concern. Detectives even dug into old reports from Franklin County Children's Services from when Christina was living in Ohio. Even though there were 3 reports of child abuse ever filed from the FCCS against Christina in Ohio, all 3 were investigated and deemed unsubstantiated. So not enough evidence that she did or did not harm her daughter.
It turned out that there were 3 unsubstantiated reports and that they grossly exaggerated the statements that they had against me. They revved up the public opinion like I was some monster. What they wanted to see was dirty movies or that she was just some slut. You didn't want to see the reasons behind anything. When I moved here, I really felt between a rock and a hard place because I didn't have a safe place to go with Amber.
Still, Christina felt that she was condemned from the beginning, not just in the eyes of law enforcement, but in the eyes of the public. The media dubbed her the psychokinetic killer mom, referencing her controversial past claims of telekinetic powers in her childhood. The community's response was harsh. In jail, she was physically attacked while awaiting trial. This small, deeply religious town viewed her as a manipulative outsider, suspicious not just because of the allegations, but because of who she was. Even though those who knew Christina personally thought she was innocent, those in Carroll County believed Christina was a monster or the devil. She was already guilty in the eyes of the small town.
I remember the night that the child was found. I worked for the department for 31 years, but it's probably one of the most traumatic things I've ever witnessed.
As bad as the kid was, this was probably definitely death. I looked at her as more guilty because she's her mother. He's the person here on this earth that's supposed to protect.
Amber came to Carrollton and didn't have a job, was on food stamps, supplementing her salary by sexual adult movies.
Christina's reputation was absolutely slaughtered. On the front page of the newspaper, it says not only child murderer, but psychic child murderer. After those newspaper headlines came out, I don't believe there was anybody left in town that didn't believe she did it. Because she was the witch. She was the paranormal. Her friend and advocate Jeannie said. Christina's unusual past, particularly her psychic abilities and appearance on Unsolved Mysteries, came back to haunt her in the worst way. This episode actually aired not long after Amber's death, and in a deeply religious conservative Georgia town, it only added fuel to the fire. To many locals, she wasn't just a grieving mother. She was a psychic, a witch, a woman dabbling in the paranormal. In the eyes of the public, that made her dangerous, untrustworthy, and evil.
Anybody who knows about this is gonna look at me like I'm crazy. And it's just another thing to be different. It doesn't end. Because I can't cover up my past and I can't hide it from anyone. So it's right out there in plain view. I feel vulnerable to it.
But the scrutiny didn't stop there. Christina wasn't just judged for her past. She was vilified for who she was. A poor, white, unwed mother trying just to survive. In a small town where image mattered, that was enough to make her guilty. She wasn't granted the benefit of the doubt. Instead, she was painted as unstable, immoral, and unfit. Someone who must have harmed her daughter simply because she didn't meet the town's rigid expectations of what a good mother should be. It's like my life is fractured into different pieces. There's the Tina growing up in the foster home, the Tina who is the paranormal freak of nature, the Tina with Amber, and the Christina in death the years after Amber. The only time in my life I can say that I knew what love was with Amber.
Because she wasn't from here, I think that they quickly arrived at an opinion of her, and it wasn't good.
She was this outsider who had a supposed paranormal past, was a single mom.
The investigation into Christina was more focused on the circumstances around Christina and how she was as a mother, and not about the actual facts of the case.
Investigators leaned into this narrative. At one point, police even brought up Christina's past involvement in sex work, something she did during desperate times just to keep food on the table for her and her daughter. They claim she appeared in homemade videos filmed by a neighbor, one of her dancing topless, and another where she and the neighbor were watching pornography. And in that video, baby Amber briefly walked into the room wearing only a diaper. That moment, however brief, however complicated, was weaponized against Christina. Authorities and locals alike asked, what kind of mother brings her child into that environment? Christina never denied the videos. She admitted it was a poor decision on her behalf, but insisted it came from desperation, not from neglect. She didn't have money for childcare, she said. She was young, alone, and struggling, but instead of empathy, she was met with outrage and judgment. In a community shaped by conservative values and steeped in religious morality, Christina's past wasn't just misunderstood, it was used to bury her. Despite both trials being moved to Floyd County to avoid jury bias, local sentiment was already stacked against Christina. Residents called for the harshest punishment available. Her unusual past, strained relationships, and media portrayal all contributed to a perception that she was manipulative, deceitful, and guilty, even though she wasn't with Amber when Amber died.
When Christina Boyer appeared in court this afternoon, she didn't get a chance to tell the judge much.
Do you understand these charges, or do you wish to have them read to you?
She said she understands that she's being charged with murder and cruelty to her daughter. Her 3-year-old daughter, Amber, was beaten beyond recognition and beyond life. Mrs. Boyer did tell Channel 2 News exclusively,
I didn't murder my daughter.
Amber was at the home of Mrs. Boyer's boyfriend, David Heron, when she died. We've learned that her defense will be to blame him.
This is a free call from Christina Boyer, an inmate at Pulaski State Prison.
On April 14th, 1992, I left Amber alone with David as I went to work for 6 hours with my therapist, Jeannie Dollar. In the days leading up to that, as I would come home, Amber would increasingly have more bruises. I believed Amber and I believed David when they told me that Amber had fallen down the stairs and that she had fallen off the curb. The day that I got home, Amber had significantly more bruises on her. When I asked David what was going on, what happened to her, why does she look like this, David just kept saying, I'm sorry.
One detective summed it up like this. She was the mother, she was supposed to protect her. If he was doing this to her baby and she knew it, then it was her responsibility to get her out of there. She's right where she needs to be. Police eventually charged both Christina and David with murder and cruelty to children, but their legal outcomes diverged sharply. Christina's trial was first and she faced a potential death sentence. She was facing electrocution on Georgia's death row. This was life and death for her. Though she initially had 3 public defenders, all with conflicts of interest, she was eventually assigned James Jimmy Dodd Barry, a high-profile death penalty attorney from that area. Christina, at first, was excited that she got James Barry since he had a stellar track record of having his clients not receive the death penalty. She hoped he would help her prove her innocence, but they rarely met beyond brief pretrial conversations. And in her eyes, all he cared about was making sure she would avoid the electric chair, ultimately maintaining his near-perfect client record. To this day, Christina doesn't believe that he actually ever truly thought she was innocent, nor did he even think she was innocent enough for a trial to plead his client's innocence. Despite Christina's consistent claims of innocence, she was ultimately pressured into accepting an Alford plea, a legal option that allowed her to maintain her innocence while conceding that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict her. This outcome was heavily shaped by her court-appointed attorney, James Barry, who failed her from the very beginning.
Do you regret that decision?
Yes, because quite frankly, I would rather be dead than to suffocate alive here.
Instead of thoroughly investigating her case, challenging inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline, or even advocating for a fair trial, her attorney steered her toward a plea that stripped her of the chance to fully defend herself. And to make matters worse, no family, friends, or character witnesses were present at her trial. Not because they didn't care, but because they weren't informed in time or didn't have the means to attend. Christina had friends and relatives willing to testify on her behalf, but they were not given that opportunity. Christina stood alone, unsupported, and poorly represented, while the justice system moved swiftly to sentence her to life in prison without truly hearing her side. Years after the fact, an invoice that was sent to the state revealed that James Barry only spent a little over 17 hours working on Christina's case. At least that's what he documented. That's not even a 24-hour work week to defend a client on death row, and records show that, at the time, James Barry was also working on a second high-profile death penalty case, so his primary focus was on that particular case. The DA and the judge kept saying, "Are you pleading guilty?" And I said, "Yes, but I didn't do this. I signed the paper, but I'm innocent," Christina recalls. Jeannie, who was Christina's counselor, claims that James Barry even told her that if she convinced Christina to reject that plea, she was sending her friend to the electric chair. Ultimately, Christina entered an Alford plea on October 1994, pleading guilty while maintaining her innocence, simply to avoid the death penalty. She was sentenced to life plus 20 years and remains incarcerated at the Pulaski State Prison in Hawkinsville, Georgia, to this very day. But Christina ultimately didn't want to, and to this day still pleads her innocence that she was never the one to kill her daughter Amber. But in that moment, she felt like she had no other option than to take the plea. James Barry told her that was the only way to avoid the chair and didn't think that she should stand before a jury. Immediately after sentencing, Barry reportedly defended his strategy by allegedly saying Christina was a bad mother and not a good person.
She had a terrible court-appointed attorney. He began to assassinate her character and say that, well, she just was a bad mother, and they had all this evidence that she just wasn't a good person anyway.
Whether Christina was a horrible mother, neglectful mother, lackadaisical mother, or just a young mother, it doesn't matter. Right. That has nothing to do with what happened on that day. She was not there.
I think she just, she wasn't mature enough to have a baby and have a child. But I never saw her be abusive.
It's hard for me to remember a lot of stuff. I have spotty memories at the county jail anyway, because every time I would go to the mental health department, it seemed like they would increase my medication. I really didn't understand how I could be saying that I'm innocent and I'm pleading guilty. But all he kept telling me is that I would be home in 4 years. And if I wanted to live, this is the best way to do it, because if I went to trial, that they were going to execute me.
I was telling her, you're innocent, don't do it. Don't take the deal. And the attorney called me and said that I was sending my friend to the electric chair and all this stuff.
The day when I went to the courthouse, Mary isolated me from everybody else. He told me that Jeannie and Bill and Mike and all of them were not there. I come to find out that they were there, and he told them that I didn't want to see them. Anybody who would talk me into not taking that plea, he kept them away from me. I couldn't protect myself. I couldn't stand up for myself. I wasn't stable enough to do anything. Barry, you were supposed to protect me, and you let me down.
Just a day after accepting the plea deal, Christina confided in her diary that she wasn't sure she made the right choice. She continued to maintain her innocence, even in the privacy of her own journal. She wrote about her fear of dying alone in prison and her hope that somehow, someday, she might get a second chance at life. Then David's trial was held in 1995. The medical examiner testified that it wasn't impossible Amber had sustained the fatal injury before Christina left for work. But if so, Amber would have begun showing clear signs of distress within 15 to 30 minutes. And even though the medical examiner believes that Amber received the fatal blow during the hours while she was alone with David, that same medical examiner also testified that it's not impossible that the injuries were inflicted in the morning and she died in the evening, allowing some room for Christina to have inflicted the fatal injury. David was convicted only of cruelty to children and sentenced to 20 years. The jury basically charged David with cruelty to children for failing to take Amber to the hospital in the days leading up to her death after the alleged abuse at the hands of her mother. He served only 12 years of his 20-year sentence and was released on parole in 2011.
That is one big pile of shit.
Detective Mike Thomas said years later that the fact of Christina's guilty plea, even if under the Alford plea, likely influenced David's jury. But years later, Christina Boyer's case is finally getting the attention it deserves, thanks in part to the 2023 Hulu documentary Demons and Saviors. The series has brought her story to a global audience, and with it, a growing movement of people advocating for her release and full exoneration. They call themselves Team Tina, and they believe what Christina has said all along, that she never got a fair trial. The documentary follows 3 Georgetown University students who originally reviewed Christina's case as part of a class assignment. But what they uncovered went far beyond the classroom. The more these students dug, the more inconsistencies they found, holes in the case that point to Christina's innocence. Now they're leading the charge to bring justice to a woman who spent decades behind bars for a crime many believe that she didn't commit. One of the most compelling arguments from Team Tina is simple. Christina wasn't even home when the fatal injuries occurred. She had an alibi and a witness to back her up. Yet instead of focusing on that, the case centered on a narrative of alleged long-term abuse, one that didn't fully match the timeline or physical evidence. Because there are so many more people involved, I sat here for years with very few people really knowing what had happened and caring. So I have more hope now that if there's anything that can be done, somebody will find it. Supporters argue that Christina's conviction wasn't based solely on evidence. It was shaped by bias, fear, and stigma. She was an outsider with a paranormal past, a poor single mother with a non-traditional lifestyle. To conservative locals and the media, she didn't fit the mold of a sympathetic grieving parent. Her reputation was far from the clean girl image, and that made her an easy target for vilification. That narrative not only skewed public perception, it likely tainted the jury pool as well. Many believe it played a key role in her being offered the Alford plea and ultimately receiving a life sentence, which at the time was the only alternative to the death penalty. But even with a growing number of supporters rallying behind her, not everyone believes in Christina's innocence, especially not in Carrollton, Georgia. Some of the people closest to the original case, her former court-appointed attorney, local detectives, and prosecutors, still view her as guilty. To them, Christina is the same manipulative figure they believed her to be in 1992. The same girl who, in their eyes, faked her psychic abilities as a teenager just to gain attention. But one of Christina's earliest and most dedicated advocates is artist and photographer Jan Benning. He first met Christina while photographing women in prison for a personal project. But to him, her story stood out. And from there, the two formed a bond, and with Christina's help, Jan went on to write a book exposing the injustices surrounding her case. That book became a catalyst. It sparked the documentary, brought national attention to her story, and helped raise money through her first crowdfunding campaign to support legal and investigative efforts. Without Jan, Christina's case might never have reached the mainstream the way it has today.
This is a portrait that I made of Christina in 2013. Well, now she's been in prison for more than 26 years. Well, I didn't murder my daughter. The million-dollar question seems to be then, why would I plead guilty if I wasn't? Does anyone not remember they were trying to kill me? They wanted me in the electric chair for killing Amber. I had a lawyer who was clearly not going to help me. I was under extreme stress and on tons of medication that left me very drugged up. I had no intention of pleading guilty to murder. Then comes my lawyer, telling me there's nothing he can do. The jailer telling me I'm going straight to the electric chair. Then on the day of court, the lawyer comes in. I remember crying almost uncontrollably and the lawyer telling me I needed to calm down. The judge kept asking me, "Do you understand?" And I kept telling him I didn't murder Amber. Then the lawyer kept leaning over, saying, "We've talked about this already." I kept looking at everyone, telling them I didn't do this, but no one, not even the lawyer, was listening.
I think the subtext is that you guys are naive, that, that she's manipulative and therefore you've been manipulated.
Give her an Oscar. We've known her for 4 years at this point, and she's maintained the same story for 32 years.
Retired Carrollton Police Department detectives Mike Bradley and Mike Thomas appeared in Demons and Saviors, holding firm in their original stance. They're listening to her side, and that's the only side they know. If we could put this whole case file back together and sit them down, I guarantee you I could change their minds.
Christina looks like this sweet, innocent little person that's been railroaded, but Christina has that ability to come across one way and then behave completely differently in private.
Peter Skandalakis, the lead prosecutor in Christina's trial, is still questioned about the bizarre disparity between her sentence and that of her ex-boyfriend, David Herron. People say, here you have Christina Boyer, who is obviously held to a higher standard because she's the mother, serving life in prison. David Herron gets convicted of cruelty and does 20 years. How is that fair? My answer to that is, I don't know. After the jury acquitted him of murder, I remember them filing out of the courtroom. I asked one of the jurors, how did you find him not guilty of felony murder, but guilty of cruelty to children? She looked me straight in the eyes and said, it wasn't his child. That single sentence, it wasn't his child, perfectly captures the heart of the injustice that so many now see in Christina's case. To them, she was judged not only for what happened, but for who she was. A single mother who, with a controversial past, living in a town ready to condemn her.
I don't know what happened to that child in that house during that 3 or 4 day period. I don't know. I do know they're both equally responsible.
It doesn't feel like equal responsibility, though, if one person
I
causes
understand
death.
what you're saying.
There is a lot at stake in terms of who struck that fatal blow.
In all probability, the one that was the most physical with that child was probably Christina.
But why is it not important to know who struck that blow?
Even years after accepting the plea deal, Christina maintains that she never fully understood what she was actually agreeing to. She claims her court-appointed attorney, James Barry, never adequately explained the terms of her Alford plea. According to Christina, she believed the deal meant that she'd be released in just 4 years, especially since she had already served 3 years in the county jail while awaiting trial. She thought she'd be eligible for parole after 7 years total, but she quickly discovered that that wasn't the case. In 1999, after realizing the parole board had absolutely no intention of granting her release at the 7-year mark, Christina sued the state of Georgia for wrongful incarceration. Her legal argument was that her plea had not been knowing, voluntary, and intelligent, as required by the Supreme Court's precedent in Boykin versus Alabama. She said she was heavily medicated with antidepressants and antipsychotics while in jail, which clouded her judgment at the time that she agreed to her plea. Her attorney, however, testified that he had clearly advised her to take the Alford plea in order to avoid the death penalty and to bypass the mandatory minimum 25-year sentence before parole eligibility that would come with a murder conviction. He argued that it was quite evident that Christina understood the consequences. Then in 2002, her state habeas corpus petition was denied. To this day, despite maintaining good behavior and meeting all conditions, Christina's parole has been denied repeatedly, yet she refuses to give up hope. She has always insisted that she did not in fact kill her daughter Amber, and she continues to fight for her own freedom. "I want to stay and make it out of this prison. I just don't want them to win," she said. "You got me here, but I want to make it to the other side of here, and make it where I survived this, I made it." In one chilling moment, she recalled what a parole board member allegedly told a reporter after her first hearing. "She'll stay here until they carry her dead body out." Christina Boyer's response to that? "Well, I want to make it out." Christina's fellow inmates speak very highly of her. Many say that the way she talks about Amber with deep love and unshakable sorrow makes it hard to believe that she could have ever hurt her daughter. In prison, she's become a mentor to others, actually helping women earn their GEDs and encouraging them to believe in second chances. And Christina is currently working toward obtaining a bachelor's degree in communications and business administration. She's also found strength in faith. Christina regularly attends Bible study and has earned an associate's degree in church administration through the Christian college and seminary. "My faith is the only thing that has gotten me through," she said. "If I didn't have God, I wouldn't be able to make it. Whatever storms I go through, God is the one that carries me. I refuse to let the situation or prison define who I am, though it has helped shape who I will become. I am a survivor." Though she has struggled with depression throughout her life and spent many years consumed by grief and despair over the death of her daughter Amber, Christina credits both therapy and prayer with helping her find her purpose. And despite everything, Christina refuses to call herself a victim of circumstance. To this day, Christina has never been allowed to visit Amber's grave. She also wasn't even permitted to attend her own daughter's funeral. If she's ever actually released, she says the first thing she would do is to go to the cemetery and place flowers on her daughter Amber's grave and finally speak to her. Christina is grateful for the attention Hulu's Demons and Saviors documentary series has brought to her story. And she's grateful to everyone who has helped her case get more attention from the public and the media. She believes it's her responsibility to shine a light on the failures of a system that too often condemns people not for what they've done, but for how they're perceived. She says she's one of many women, poor, young, unconventional, who are criminalized not just for alleged crimes, but for their poverty, trauma, and for simply being a mom. For years, Christina says she's felt silenced, broken, and invisible. But now, for the first time in decades, she feels heard, seen, not as a monster, but as a woman who survived. Ultimately, Christina hopes that Amber's memory is never forgotten, and that her own story might help uncover just how many others, just like her, may still be waiting, unheard, unseen, behind prison walls.
Don't think for a moment that I don't take responsibility for Amber's death, because I'm the one that trusted David. I'm the one that brought him into our lives, and I'm the one that left her with him. I believed in him and I trusted him, and ultimately, that's my fault.
So what do you make of this case? One thing is certain, Christina Boyer's story is as polarizing as it is haunting. Literally. Some are convinced of her innocence, others remain sure of her guilt. But the one truth we can all agree on, we may never truly know what happened to little Amber on the tragic day of her death. Her life was taken far too soon, and the truth behind it remains tangled in a web of speculation, fear, and pain. What we do know is that Christina was villainized, deeply and publicly, simply for being different. In a small, rural, deeply religious southern town where women in the 80s and 90s were expected to be quiet, obedient, and conventional, Christina didn't fit that mold. She was a single mother with a troubled past and a public history that made her an easy target. In many ways, it seems her trial wasn't just about justice, it was about judgment. And hers, unlike her boyfriend's, was swift and unforgiving. Was this an attack on women, or an attack specifically on this specific woman, who was simply the right example to make a mockery of at the wrong time? Her past, her mistakes, and her unconventional life were all used against her. And while we'd like to think that today's justice system would see through bias and focus only on the facts, the truth is, bias still runs deep. Whether it's based on gender, class, or perception, justice isn't always blind. Christina's case, or her portrayal, reminds me of the current highly polarizing ongoing case of Karen Read. Both women at the center of controversial, emotionally charged trials. And in both cases, public perception has played a massive role in shaping their narratives long before a fair trial ever could. From the beginning, Karen Read has been under the microscope, not just for what allegedly happened, but for how she presents herself. Her appearance, her tone, her demeanor, being painted as emotional, erratic, or manipulative. A familiar narrative often used to cast women as inherently unstable or untrustworthy. Both women were, or are, being judged by more than just the facts. They've become symbols of something bigger. How our justice system and society can allow personal biases, outdated gender expectations, and sensationalist storytelling to influence outcomes. In Christina's case, it took decades and a true crime documentary to reignite interest in what many believe was a deeply flawed prosecution. Karen's case is unfolding in real time, with the court of public opinion raging louder than ever thanks to social media. But both cases offer a very similar parallel. When a woman doesn't fit the mold society expects of her, how fair can her trial really be? There are multiple petitions online today calling for Christina's release. Some critics say the Demons and Saviors documentary leans too far into her favor. Others believe it finally gave a voice to someone who has been silenced for far too long. But no matter what side you stand on, one thing is clear. This story, this case, forces us to confront our own assumptions about justice, about motherhood, about who we believe, and why. No one is perfect. Everyone has a past. The question is, should someone's past determine their fate? Was Christina Boyer a product of her upbringing, a victim of bias, or a woman hiding something far darker? The world may never know for sure, but one thing is certain. The final judgment may have already been handed down, but Christina Boyer's story is far from over.